Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and Merry Christmas to all of you. Hope you guys all had a really great Christmas if you're watching this on Christmas or after Christmas. But as you guys know, since it is Christmas, it is in fact time for another Doctor Who Christmas special. Just like last year I reviewed the Doctor Who one, I figured I'd have to review this year's, and this year's is a lot bigger of a deal because last year's we already had 12 episodes of Doctor Who to, we already had the necessary amounts where I felt satisfied, and this was just an extra episode to enjoy, and it's completely different this year. We haven't had any season of Doctor Who. I mean, this is the longest waits that we've had to wait for the show, and it was supposed to come out, I believe, this year, but they postponed it to April of next year. So this is the first Doctor Who we've had in a long time, and this, of course, is going to be for the Christmas special, the return of Dr. Mysterio. And let's get into this episode, because this was a really, really different type of episode. Because while this episode was, in fact, a Christmas special, it really didn't focus much on the Christmas aspect of it. It was more of a superhero-type vigilante story that I thought was actually told really, really well, but it wasn't your typical Doctor Who episode. In fact, the Doctor wasn't even that huge part, that big of a part of it. Like, he wasn't really the main character. It was more about, this superhero, which we'll get into, but let's just get into this episode because there isn't a ton to talk about, but I do still want to talk about because I really did enjoy this episode overall, which I really had no expectations going into this. I really didn't think this was going to be that good. It looked really cheesy. It looked really Americanized, and that's what this essentially was. It was, like I said, a very different kind of episode, but for the most part, it worked really well. So we start off and we see the scene where we're in a child's bedroom in Kansas, basically. And we're not in Britain, we're in Kansas. And it's very strange to start in Kansas, but it was kind of refreshing, honestly. I thought it was kind of cool the way that they did that here. And we see the Doctor, he's hanging upside down outside the window because he got caught in his own trap. We are to assume that this is after his 24 years that he spent with River Song, which that in itself is very sad to think about. They don't really talk about it in this episode, and that's understandable because this is a different kind of episode. Like I said, it's meant to be more of just a fun episode rather than anything that serious, and I thought they did an okay job with that. But he's hanging upside down outside the window because he got caught in his own trap, and Grant, the kid, lets the Doctor in. He presents him with milk and cookies, presuming him to be Santa, and of course, he's not actually Santa. We know Santa was actually Nick Frost, who played Santa, oddly enough, in the 2 years ago in the Doctor Who Last Christmas, which I never actually saw that episode, but they wait for Grant's parents to go to sleep, and the Doctor catches up on his comic book reading. First, he figures out that Superman and Clark Kent are the same person, which Grant tells him that everyone already knows, and as the Doctor's face falls, he argues that Lois Lane doesn't, and she's a reporter, and I thought there was just some really fun stuff, like right off the bat, Peter Capaldi's getting right back into this role, and this is the Doctor I love. I love the Doctor that's really snarky, really kind of like a kid, and just really animate. This is the Doctor that I really love, and I'm glad that they're still giving us that Doctor. They've really, you can tell, have utilized Peter Capaldi's talents very, very well. Attention to Peter Parker, or possibly Miles Morales, we're not really sure, but we get this great exchange where the Doctor asks why they don't call him Spider-Man, don't they like him, and Grant says that he was bitten by a radioactive spider, and guess what happens, and Doctor says it was radiation poisoning, he should think, and Grant says that he got special powers, and the Doctor's asking about hair loss, vomiting, and death, fat lot of use, and it's just a really fun scene. There are a lot of really great scenes like this here, and they did a really good job of kind of making fun of superhero stories, and it would make sense that the Doctor doesn't know much about this because, the Doctor's always traveling in the TARDIS. He's not really up to date when it comes to modern times, and I thought that was interesting to see. But once on the roof, the Doctor asked him to place a glowing red gemstone, a pure initiative dwarf star crystal that draws energy from the nearest star. He handed him in earlier into the time distortion equalizer thing, and it turns out the Coal Hill School isn't the only place the Doctor is disrupted with his time and space traveling shenanigans, but we quickly find out that Grant swallowed the gem, also actually a tiny computer, of which there are only 4 in the world. So you very quickly see how this can become a problem. The Doctor's freaking out that he can't just go around swallowing things, saying he's asking if he's 36, but Grant points out he's 12. He had given him a glass of water from his pockets and called himself a doctor, so he just assumed it was medicine for his cough, and again, it's kind of silly, but it makes sense. I mean, when you think of a doctor, he didn't think of him as a doctor, as a scientist. He thought of him as a legitimate doctor. And I thought that was pretty funny, honestly, that he thought this was like a doctor that's giving him medicine. And Grant soon learns that one of the side effects of swallowing strange glowing rocks is getting superpowers, and the doctor explains the result of reading too many comic books. It's giving him what he wants. He's a superhero, and I thought that was a pretty funny way to start things out. I definitely really did like that overall. And again, they did a pretty good job of setting all this up. I definitely really did love the way this was done. But the Doctor makes Grant promise not to use his newfound powers, but to let the crystal pass through him. But as he discovers a few years later, when he visits kid Teen Grant in school, the Doctor is a relief algebra teacher to some unsuspecting kids, because again, he has to do whatever he can to cover up his identity. And Grant's it's basically Grant has this X-ray vision, one of his gifts other than basic flying and super strength, and it's completely out of control. He's making adolescence much, much harder. He's in hell, he's naked hell, and the Doctor figures the crystal is now part of Grant's DNA. Again, some really interesting stuff here. I thought they did a really good job of setting up this character of Grant, and you very much do care about him. You know, this was a regular kid who kind of just went down the wrong path, and I thought they did a really good job of setting up his character overall. I definitely thought that was very well done. But then we flash forward to the future, where most of the episode takes place, where we see a press conference is underway at a research institute at Harmony Shawl, and Miss Fletcher, a reporter, raises her hand, asks its spokesperson, Mr. Brock, who is our main antagonist in the episode, who I will admit was very over the top, but he was suitably over the top. Again, this wasn't a typical Doctor Who episode. This was supposed to be a little bit more cheesy, a little bit sillier, and it worked. I thought for this story it worked. Would it work in other Doctor Who episodes? I'm not entirely sure, but I feel like in something like this, where they're just doing something so ridiculous, it worked. And he says they have so many benefactors and why she can't find them. And basically, he talks about how he killed them all. He buried them in his backyard. Miss Fletcher asks how big is his backyard, and he says the size of Wyoming. But also present is Nardole, who we remember Nardole, who was the husband, I believe, of River Song in the last Christmas special. He seems like he is basically going to be the Doctor's companion until Bill comes in. We know that Bill's going to come back in for a little bit, but for right now, he is the Doctor's companion, and he works really well as that. He's with his constant. He says he found his way in Narnia. He doesn't get an answer. Miss Fletcher goes off to talk to a cleaning lady, and as we see later that night, she's going undercover in that uniform. So we know that obviously there's something sketchy going on. So Miss Fletcher follows Brock and a Dr. Slim to a top-secret vault filled with brains in jars. Slim points out the number of brains is growing because they're now 36, and there's something going on with that number. We don't really know what that's about, but we have to assume that that's the age that Grant is. And the Doctor is busy snagging on some sushi. He joins Fletcher on her spying, and he says he brought snacks, the mark of a pro. So you know that definitely, again, something's going on. But back in the vault, Brock taps one of the jars. Eyes emerge in the brain, and he says, "Don't be so alarmed." Slim tells him as if that line has ever worked, and turns out these aliens are replacing the brains of people with the ones in these jars. So again, pretty out there concept, but it made sense. It really did make sense for this episode. I mean, it had to be something really ridiculous, and that's what happened to Sim, we find out, who has a diagonal scar across his face, and now Brock, surgeons en masse emerge from hidden compartments and capture the poor guy. So now we know really what's going on, that these are aliens obviously getting into their head, and they did that pretty well. I like the way they set this up overall. But we then meet Lucy Fletcher, who you think is going to be the companion, but I like that she wasn't. I like that she was actually a reporter, because again, they did a good job of trying to allude to Superman and kind of like the Lois Lane of the story, and I thought for the most part she worked really well. I really did like her performance in this episode, but the Doctor gets away. He's joined by Nardole, who's also on location, and just as the Doctor points out that Harmony Shawl has facilities in several major cities, Sim happens upon them with a gun. While the Doctor tries to talk the way out of this, there's a knock at the door, and then we get to the real plot, where we see that, of course, we knew, but to everyone's surprise, there's a man in a mask and cape floating there. Sim shoots him, but the bullets ricochet off his body quite easily, proving quite the homage to the Man of Steel himself. They did a pretty good job of making the scene really intense, and determined not to hurt anyone too badly, he shoves Sim, who passes out. Then the hero introduced himself as the Ghost, which is probably after the Gemstone's nickname of the Ghost of Love and Wishes, and he flies Lucy home, and it's kind of cool the way we were kind of seeing, again, this allude to Super Superman. I thought that was really cool. And it was just a really good homage. I thought they did a good job with that. And Lucy retorts that he's real, and he read to the ghost comment that he's a fan of her newspaper column. She's a little bit surprised about that, but she's also surprised that he's real. This didn't seem like something that was actually true, but Grant drops Lucy off in the street. But just then, Grant's baby monitor goes off, and he says, "Look at that, the back signal's an app now," which that was a very funny line. Again, there were some really funny lines throughout this entire episode. And Lucy says, he says, "I love you, Lucy, never change." However, when Grant gets home to the apartment, he now works as a live-in nanny to a baby named Jennifer. So he finds a doctor in Nardole waiting for him, and it turns the doctor does in fact recognize him from their little exchange back at the Institute. And I like that. I like that the doctor knew who he was. We didn't need this whole big thing of the doctor not knowing who he was. It just wouldn't make sense. So it turns the doctor actually recognized him, and he says that he thought they had a lot of doctors. He's the main one, which of course was a callback to the one they had when he was a kid. And the doctor then quotes Uncle Ben's iconic line about power and responsibility. And I love how he made all of this seem like this was him that did this, and that he, again, is a legitimate doctor. And before admonishing Grant for leaving Jennifer alone, he also questioned the insanity of Grant's decision to be a nanny and a superhero, because he just doesn't understand how he can live this double life. And I thought that was kind of interesting the way that was done. I thought it was a pretty funny scene, and, you're kind of wondering why he's not just, really what's going on there. Obviously, even though the doctor, did this to Grant, and he's been through so much stuff, he can't really fathom how he can be a nanny and a superhero. I mean, that's like asking the doctor to be a father and the doctor, which he kind of was to Claire. In many ways, he was kind of that father figure to Claire, but as we saw in the last season, that really did not work out very well. It turned, a lot of disagreements between them, a lot of very harsh confrontations, and it just didn't really work. And I thought it was kind of cool the way they compared that to this, and you can definitely tell the doctor doesn't really know how he can live this double life either. So we don't get a chance, though Mrs. Lombard, the baby's mother, comes home. We learn it's none other than Lucy, we find out, and then we get into a very interesting plot twist that really does connect all these characters together. So Lucy goes off to put Jennifer down before returning to question the doctor about his presence at Harmony Shawl, and while she's inside, the doctor realizes that Lucy is none other than the girl that Teen Grant had a massive crush on, because he talked about in when he saw this flashback of Teen Grant talked about how there were many girls that he liked, but there was only one that stood out the most, and it turns out that it was Lucy. And I will admit, it was a bit predictable. I definitely will admit that, but I thought it worked for the most part. I thought they did a good job of, running with this story. And we find out she ended up marrying Grant's best friend, who left her when Jennifer was born, so he did the obvious thing and became her nanny so she would notice what a great guy he was, which, again, not the best idea in the world, and I like that. I like that Grant's not perfect. I like that while he is the superhero, he's not really a perfect guy. He's really awkward, and you completely understand that, and I like seeing that, definitely, and then you kind of understand that he's kind of doing this all for Lucy. I really like that, but he flies off to save people from a burning building. Lucy questions the doctor. He tells her what the brains are, independent alien life forms, and what their aim is, global colonization. She then asks him who the ghost is, but he refuses to tell her, and Lucy figures out he's not used to being talked to like this because he doesn't have a boss, and we know that's kind of not true, because River Song very much called a lot of the shots, you definitely know, but, it's true. The doctor most times does work alone, unless he has someone like a Missy or a River Song, and even Clara, I think, kind of was his boss at points, but instead he tells her she's smart and practically wills her to figure it out. That there are some situations that are just too stupid to be allowed to continue. But before the big reveal can take place, Grant zips off to the other room. He calls Lucy's phone, sets up an interview, and I thought this was interesting the way we did this. And the way that scene was done, the doctor and Jennifer's reactions to create a comic book style frame, I thought was really cool the way they did that. And there's a lot of really cool parallels like that throughout this episode. And again, the way that Moffat is doing everything he can to try to make this as much of an homage to superhero, stuff as usual, is just really well done. You could tell he really did a really good job of doing that. And Lucy puts him on hold for a second to confirm if Grant can babysit, but he says that he has a date, and she seems kind of surprised since he hardly goes out. This is not someone who, goes out a lot. He's kind of an introvert, but he tells her that he'll figure it out, and we know that he doesn't really have a date. And as she leaves to confirm with the ghost, the doctor points out that he's jealous of himself, and Grant gets snippy, says he's known Lucy for 24 years, and of course we know what's really this is all about, that he's known Lucy because he's been living with River Song for 24 years, as we know. And again, I thought it was interesting the way we saw that. And basically, he says the time passes for everyone, even for him. And it's a really real moment because, again, it's very subtle. They don't talk a lot about what happened with River Song, but you can tell that what happened with River Song is still kind of embedded in his head, and he's not just going to forget it. Obviously, he spent all this time with her, and she just died, obviously, and it's really sad, definitely. So I did think they did a good job of having some really bittersweet moments such as that in this episode. So over at Harmony Shaw, Brock and Sim make plans to replace Grant's brain and try to figure out who the Doctor is, but the Doctor's there in person. He figures out they're trying to get world leaders to come to them before hopping into a Nardole flown TARDIS and zooming off to Tokyo, where he causes some Pokemon Go inspired mayhem, and that was such a cool scene, the way we got the Pokemon Go stuff. And he discovers that Harmony Shaw facility is transmitting a signal into space, and he and Nardole then trace it to a spaceship, his new companion, whom he cut out of Hydroflax, and he takes his ruler of Constantino Paul hat, puts on his therapist hat, and points that the Doctor has broken the Time Lord, promised to never interfere with other people or plans, and shouldn't get mad at Grant for using his gifts as a superhero. And he's avoiding a conversation. I like that he is genuinely concerned about the Doctor, but he was also really funny. They had some really fun moments with Nardole, how you can tell he's not really into this whole thing. He's kind of scared of what's going on, and I like that. I like that we have a very different companion, because it should be different, definitely. So when they do get on the ship, they make their way to the main control, and when they figure out it's been rigged to crash into New York, so the Harmony Shaw building is the only one that survives, and in turn, it will cause mass panic and draw out the world leaders, because, all the rich men always do when the fighting starts. They'll find the safest place to hide themselves away, and they'll send all the young people to die. That's how it always works. So they know that obviously this isn't safe at all, and the Doctor knows it's a great plan, but then he says that humanity has the same plan. It always has him, and because he's the Doctor, he realizes that Sim doesn't want the ship to crash yet, so he hits all the buttons on the main console. He sends a ship barreling towards Earth, and the Doctor's about to attack New York City, we see. Like, he's literally going to attack New York City, which is crazy to think about, but meanwhile, back on Earth, we learn that Lucy totally does see this dinner, which is a picnic on her roof as a date, because she wears her signature red dress, and she and the ghost get into an argument about Grant being her nanny, and she realizes that not only is she kind of jealous about Grant having a date, but also that he's never lied to her, which of course we know that he has. He's obviously, keeping this huge secret from her, and Grant's about to reveal who he is, but stops at the last second, and it's a good thing because Brock then shows up with a team ready to extract the ghost brain, and the hero flies away. Grant shows up on the roof, baby monitor in hand. He's also taken hostage quite quickly, but as Brock, who stored his gun in his brain, holds Grant at gunpoint, he hears the Doctor communicating with him on a special frequency. He does the obvious thing, tells Lucy to get down, catching the hurtling spaceship in his hand at the last moment, and revealing that he is the ghost, and it's this incredible moment where she now knows who he is, and even though we only saw Grant for one episode, I really did care about this character. I thought this was a really satisfying moment overall, and I very much care about the relation between Lucy and Grant. He's done all this for her. He's wanted to help her. He's wanted to keep her in his life, and now, as much as he didn't want to tell her, he finally got that secret to come out. I really did like that overall, and I think definitely was a very satisfying moment for a character that, like I said, was only in one episode, but a very satisfying character, at that. So the Doctor shows up delighted with the turn of events, nervous that Grant tells Lucy not to slap him. She tells him she prefers him in his superhero costume, puts his glasses on him and kisses him, and they flow into the air, still holding the potentially explosive ship. They leave Jennifer and her baby monitor in the Doctor's care, and here's something that I found very surprising, that the Doctor really is kind of ineffective in this mission. Like, he's definitely a part of it, but he's really not the one to fix all this. This is all Grant that's really has to deal with all this, and because we see that Brock tries to point a gun at the Doctor, he just sonic screwdrives it to malfunction. He then announces that unit is on its way to close the main facility, and what the Doctor doesn't know is the brain from Slim has made its way into the body of one of the unit agents, and of course we know that Osgood's going to have her hands a little full, because we know that Osgood's still out there, and I'm pretty sure this is going to come back in Series 10. I don't know how, but definitely we're going to hear something about this next series, but we'll have to see. But later that night, they're all seated at Lucy's dinner table. The Doctor says he was gone for a while, but he's back to save the world again, and Lucy initially asks him what her name was, and as per usual, the Doctor deflects, heads into the TARDIS, and this is where Nardole steps up, explains he's still upset about River Song, but will will be alright in the end. And again, just that little subtle moment where he's talking about River Song and how much he cared about her. You really get that they have kind of gone through this tragedy together, and I like that. I like this scene with Lucy and all of them talking about what they went through, and he said he'll make sure of it. And we get to the very end. Doctor gives this great speech where he says that things end, that's all, everything begins again too, and that's good. And of course, that's a very subtle kind of way of Moffat saying that, yeah, Claire's gone, but there's going to be a new companion, and it's going to keep going on, and this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. And it's a good way of showing that. I thought it was a good way of getting us into that cycle. And we get to the end where Lucy asks Doctor Who, and Grant says it is none other than Dr. Mysterio, who of course he said was the Doctor's name when he first met him. And that is the way this episode ends. Really good stuff overall. Let's just get in this episode, because there's really not a ton to talk about in terms of this episode, but I do want to talk about a couple things. So overall, guys, really not a ton to talk about in terms of where I think we're really headed. Like I said, I think the only thing that's going to come up is the whole unit agents and Osgood. We know that Osgood's obviously still out there, so I'm pretty sure this is somehow going to come back up, but I don't think we're going to see any more of the story really again. This was simply a one-off, and for a one-off, it worked really, really well. They told a really good story here. They kept the Doctor to the side, but he still was a large part of the story. Like, obviously, he was definitely substantial in the story. I'm not going to say they didn't give him stuff to do, because they did give him quite a lot to do, but he just wasn't in it as much as he's been in other episodes, and that's completely fine. You know, the Doctor doesn't need to be the huge focus of every single episode. He doesn't need to be. That's just kind of how it is, and I really did like how fun this episode really was. I thought for the most part, it worked really, really well. I definitely did like the way that they did that, and I think that the actors here were really good. You know, Justin Chatwin did an incredible job as the Ghost, and I really did care about Grant as a character. I thought that, yeah, we've seen his character before, but they did a good job of, like I said, paying homage to, you know, really what ends up happening, you know, with Grant and paying homage to different kinds of superheroes. I really thought that was very well done. I thought he overall was really great. Charity Wakefield was really great as Lucy. I really liked her character. You know, there wasn't really much to her, but I thought she was really good overall. And Nat Lucas, I really liked him as Nardole. I'm hoping we're going to see more Nardole next series, and we did get a preview at the end of this of showing Bill, and I like it so far. I know I said that I wasn't a huge fan of Bill in the Series 10 video that I talked about, you know, that preview of Series 10, but again, like I said, that was just a preview. That wasn't actual footage. That was just showing Bill, and it looks like Bill isn't going to be nearly as irritating. She just looks a lot more animated and fun than Clara was, and I like that. I want something different from next series. I think that every Doctor should be different and every companion should be different, and that's just how the show should go, because you can't just have the same kind of things over and over again. That gets boring after a while. In fact, I suspect next season to be way different from the last one. I don't think next series is going to be nearly as dark. I think we're kind of going in a more fun direction, and I like that. I'm completely fine with going in a more fun direction. Doctor Who can be a lot of fun sometimes, and this is a really good example of how fun the show can be when you don't really give them a ton to work with, because, yeah, there was stuff to work with here. I thought for the most part this episode was really fun. It was really funny. I thought that we had some really great character moments, and there were some things I thought were a little bit underused. Like, I do think that Nardole could have been used a little bit more. He was kind of used sporadically throughout the episode, and I definitely they gave him more than they did in, you know, Husbands of River Song, but I kind of wanted just a little bit more from him. But I did like the way that Husbands of River Song very well, you know, this episode very well followed that, because this was a big deal. The return of Dr. Mysterio, you know, reference that the Doctor's been gone for 24 years, and they very well showed that in this episode. I very well like that. I think that Lucy could have been developed maybe a little bit more flashbacks with Grant, but like I said, for what they did here, I thought this worked really well overall, and I am going to give the Doctor Who Christmas Special, The Return of Dr. Mysterio, a 4 out of 5 or a B+. So overall, guys, that's it for my review of this Christmas special. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode overall. Loved your thoughts on it. Did you think it was as fun as I did? Are you looking forward to Series 10? I can't wait to see what Series 10 is going to give us. I'm very happy to get more Doctor Who next year, and I was happy to see more Doctor Who. You know, it's been a long time since we had an episode, and I thought it was cool that we had another one. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be most likely for a movie review, or it'll be for the season of Horace and Pete, because I do plan to finish that tomorrow, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.